Imagine sitting calmly in your first-class seat, the soft hum of the airplane creating a peaceful atmosphere. You're the CEO of a major airline, a woman who has built her empire with quiet strength and relentless determination. Suddenly, a flight attendant demands you move to the back of the plane, an order steeped in prejudice and contempt. What would you do if your dignity was challenged in front of dozens of strangers miles above the ground? How far would you go to stand your ground when no one else dares to speak up? And what if that very flight attendant had no idea who she was confronting, the billionaire owner of the plane? This is the story of Elena Brooks, a calm but fiercely determined black woman whose poised resistance ignited a battle for justice in the skies and beyond. As tensions rise and secrets unfold, questions linger. How does a single moment of discrimination ripple through an entire company and industry? Can one woman's quiet courage truly change an ingrained system? And what does it take to lead when the stakes are higher than ever? Join us as we unravel this gripping journey of resilience, power, and transformation. If you believe in standing up for what's right, hit like, share this story, and subscribe for more powerful, inspiring content. Let's begin. The luxury cabin of Aurora Air Flight 606 glowed with warm golden light. Cream-colored leather seats, polished mahogany accents, and the faint scent of jasmine from the air system created an illusion of serenity of a world immune to tension. But tension had just boarded. Elena Brooks stepped inside first class with the quiet grace of someone who had long since learned how to command space without demanding it. She was dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, her natural curls pulled neatly back into a low bun. Her stride was unhurried, her expression neutral, but her presence unmistakable. She reached her assigned seat, 2A, and placed her structured leather tote into the overhead compartment with practiced ease. Then she sat, adjusted her cuffs, and gazed out the window at the fading afternoon light dancing on the tarmac. To anyone looking, she was just another well-dressed woman, perhaps a consultant, maybe legal. Clean, reserved, invisible, in the way that black women in wealth often are. And that, Elena had learned, was sometimes her greatest strength. She didn't need to speak to be noticed. Her stillness carried more weight than most people shouting. Just as she began to settle in, a clipped voice sliced through the cabin. "Excuse me, miss, are you sure you're in the right seat?" Elena turned. A flight attendant stood over her with a practiced smile stretched thin across her face. Her name tag read Heather Langford, blonde, early 40s, perfectly pressed uniform, jaw clenched just a little too tight. "I am," Elena replied, her voice smooth, warm, and composed. Heather gave a short laugh, not cruel, but condescending. She glanced at Elena's seat again, then back at her boarding pass. "This section is reserved for first-class ticket holders," she said, louder this time, loud enough that the white-haired gentleman in seat 3B turned his head. Elena didn't flinch. "I understand. My boarding pass says 2A. Heather blinked, then narrowed her eyes. The moment stretched just a beat too long. Finally, Heather exhaled through her nose and turned without a word. But her posture, stiff and indignant, spoke louder than she had. From 2 rows back, Grant Pierce, a sharply dressed businessman in his 50s, watched the exchange with growing interest. He'd seen this before. The challenge was never about the seat. It was about what the person in the seat represented. And Elena, she knew this game. She'd played it in boardrooms, in elevators, at private clubs where she was the keynote speaker and still mistaken for the assistant. She had learned not to let the first slight pull her in. The real battle always came later. She adjusted her seat belt, then returned her gaze to the window. Let them wonder. Let them make assumptions. The cabin continued to fill, with the quiet hum of status ice cubes clinking into crystal glasses, hushed conversations about mergers and island homes. Yet every now and then, eyes drifted toward seat 2A. Curiosity bloomed, subtle but spreading. Heather returned minutes later to begin the welcome service. She poured champagne for the elderly couple in 1C and 1D, laughing a little too hard at Mr. Clayton's harmless flirtation. She placed fresh-cut lemon in Mrs. Clayton's water with care. When she reached Elena's row, her smile thinned again. "Would you like something to drink?" she asked, without eye contact. "Water, please," Elena replied, her voice even. Heather returned a moment later, not with water, but with a forced apology. "We're still setting up in the galley. I'll bring it shortly." She didn't. Another flight attendant, younger, more timid, passed by. Elena caught her eye and smiled kindly. "Excuse me," Elena said softly. "Could I trouble you for a glass of water?" The young woman, whose badge read Rachel Nguyen, nodded instantly. "Of course, ma'am. I'll bring it right away." Heather noticed. Her eyes narrowed. The younger attendant scurried off. Elena could feel it in the air now. The shift, the pressure. She sat still, hands resting on her lap. Inside, however, something stirred. How many times must I earn my place in a room? She was not angry. Not yet. She was exhausted. Behind her, Grant Pierce leaned toward his colleague and whispered, "She's handling that with a lot more grace than most would." His colleague, a woman in her 40s with diamond studs and a knowing gaze, replied quietly, "It's the kind of grace you develop when the world keeps testing you." The plane began to taxi. The captain's voice crackled over the speaker with a standard greeting. Outside, the runway shimmered under the sinking sun. But inside, seat 2A, the battle had already begun. Elena closed her eyes for a moment. She wasn't thinking of revenge, or power, or teaching someone a lesson. She was thinking of her daughter, and of all the young women who'd one day sit in seats just like this, unsure if they were allowed to. She opened her eyes. The fight ahead would not be loud. It would be quiet, controlled, relentless. Heather walked past again, offering a refill to another passenger, but still ignoring Elena. And Elena? She didn't say a word, but she reached down, picked up her phone, and typed out a short message. Then she placed the phone face down on the armrest. From this moment forward, Heather Langford's world would never be the same. And Elena Brooks, she would remain exactly who she was, unbothered, unshaken, unforgettable. The plane lifted off gently, gliding through the haze of dusk as it climbed above the coast. Inside the sleek first-class cabin, the noise of the engines became a soft hum, nearly drowned out by the muted jazz playing through the overhead speakers. A subtle stillness settled in. Elena Brooks leaned back in her seat, her eyes half closed, her breathing steady. On the surface, she appeared perfectly relaxed, but beneath the layers of calm, something restless stirred. She had been here before, not on this exact flight, but in this position, looked at but not seen, heard but never truly listened to, assumed less than what she was because of the skin she wore and the quiet she mastered. From the other side of the aisle, Heather Langford stood near the galley entrance, her arms crossed behind her back, her posture rigid. She didn't look at Elena, not directly, but every now and then. When Elena turned her head just slightly, she caught the way Heather's eyes lingered on her, like a silent question trying to answer itself. That glance, That measuring glance that searched for a reason why this particular woman occupied seat 2A. It was the kind of look Elena knew by heart. It wasn't curiosity. It was quiet disbelief, wrapped in performance. Heather hadn't forgotten the earlier exchange. She was stewing in it, unsure how Elena had managed to remain so collected while still quietly defiant. Heather prided herself on control. She ran first class with an iron elegance, ensuring every drink was poured at the correct angle and every napkin folded just so. Order meant everything. But Elena's stillness disrupted that order. Passengers weren't supposed to resist with silence. They were supposed to argue, complain, make a scene. Elena hadn't done any of that, and that unnerved Heather more than she could admit. Rachel Yen emerged from the galley with a tray of drinks, her ponytail bouncing slightly with every step. She moved gracefully, quietly, setting a glass of water on Elena's tray table. Elena smiled and thanked her softly. Rachel returned the smile and gave her a respectful nod before moving on to another row. Heather watched it all with thinly veiled irritation. Her fingers twitched at her sides. She approached slowly, the faux sweetness of her hospitality tightening into something colder. "Miss," she said, her voice suddenly crisp, "do you mind if I double-check your boarding stub again?" Elena turned her head, her expression unreadable. "You've already seen it." "Miss Langford," she replied gently. Heather smiled, but it was the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "Yes, of course, just being thorough. Some passengers have made honest mistakes in the past." Elena held her gaze for a long moment. Heather expected her to grow defensive, perhaps raise her voice. Instead, she replied with measured calm. "And some crew members have made assumptions that proved costly." Heather's cheeks flushed ever so slightly. She forced a light chuckle and walked away, but her steps were sharper now, her confidence chipped. Grant Pierce, still watching from a few rows behind, leaned toward his seatmate again. "She's definitely rattled," he whispered. "But the woman in 2A, she's something else. I can't place it, but she's got presence." His seatmate nodded, the kind that comes from surviving too many battles in silence. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted further. There was a subtle change in how passengers looked at Elena. Whispers passed between rows. A few heads turned. People began to wonder not what she had done wrong, but who she might be. Elena opened her tablet, scrolling through a document on aircraft safety innovations. She wasn't reading the words. She was thinking about how many times she'd chosen not to correct someone who doubted her. How many times she'd decided that silence was the better armor. But this wasn't about pride. It wasn't even about respect. It was about patterns, and what happens when no one disrupts them. She glanced toward Heather again. The attendant was now overly attentive to other passengers, smiling broadly, offering second glasses before being asked, overcompensating. But the stiffness hadn't left her spine. She was watching, waiting. She didn't like the way things had slipped from her control. She would find a way to reassert it. Elena knew it was coming. The shift always came after the second glance failed to intimidate. That was when they made it personal. Rachel returned briefly and lowered her voice to Elena. "Ma'am, if you need anything at all, please let me know directly. I'm happy to help." Elena looked at her and saw something rare in her young face. Conscience. She smiled softly. "Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate that." Rachel hesitated, then quietly added, "I saw how she spoke to you earlier. It wasn't right." Elena's eyes softened. "You're kind to say that, But I've learned that what's right doesn't always come easy. Just do your part, and the rest will follow." Rachel nodded, then moved on. Elena returned to her thoughts. There were years of memory she didn't let surface often. She remembered being 23, walking into her first investor pitch, only for the receptionist to tell her, kindly but firmly, that catering staff should enter through the back. She had walked back outside, circled the building, and re-entered through the front again. She didn't raise her voice then either, but the VC who had dismissed her that day now sat on the board of her company. Elena didn't seek revenge. She sought transformation. And transformation never came without friction. The plane steadied into cruise altitude. Heather returned with a tray of snacks, her voice bright and performative once again. She served the front rows with theatrical flourish, leaning slightly closer to the white couple in 1A and 1B, calling the gentleman sir and the woman my dear. When she reached Elena, her hand hesitated. Then, wordlessly, she placed a napkin and small dish in front of her without eye contact. No words, just dismissal, and once again, Elena said nothing. But this time, Grant spoke up. "Excuse me," he said, not loudly, but clearly. Heather turned. Yes, he gestured toward Elena. "You skipped her greeting. I noticed." Heather blinked. "Oh, I must have been distracted. Apologies." He didn't smile. "You were professional with everyone else. I think she deserves the same." A hush fell over that section of the cabin. Heather's face tightened, her mask cracking just slightly. She gave Elena a curt nod and turned away. Elena glanced at Grant. Her eyes filled with a quiet thanks. He nodded in return, his expression unreadable but firm. The tide was beginning to shift, and Heather knew it. But rather than step back, her pride pulled her forward. This wasn't over. Not yet. Elena Brooks never made power loud. She made it quiet enough to disarm. She wore it like a silk scarf, barely noticeable, until the wind shifted and revealed its full pattern. As Aurora Air Flight 606 floated above the Rockies, the pressure inside the cabin was not only from altitude. Something was tightening in the air between rows 1 and 4. People didn't know exactly what had happened, but they could sense it. A coldness, a silence louder than speech. Heather Langford was cracking. She had served coffee to the older couple in 1C and 1D with a gracious smile and called them by name. When she poured Grant Pierce's scotch, her hands trembled just slightly, and he noticed. She was trying to maintain control, to assert her presence, but her face kept darting toward Elena, even when she wasn't talking to her. Elena hadn't moved. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't made a single complaint. And yet, her calm had become the most dominant force in the room. Rachel Noyne returned from the galley carrying a stack of warm towels. She offered them with gentle hands and quiet kindness, moving row by row until she reached Elena. This time, she bent slightly and whispered, "She's escalating. I think she feels threatened." Elena looked at her, steady. "She feels unseen," she replied softly. "So she's trying to make me disappear." Rachel blinked, startled by the clarity in Elena's words. Elena accepted the towel with a nod. Heather noticed the interaction. From the galley doorway, her eyes narrowed. Then she walked back into the aisle, her step sharper, her expression blank. "Miss," she said, in a tone dipped in artificial sweetness, "we need to speak. In private." Elena turned to face her fully now. "What's the concern?" "Miss Langford?" Heather gave a practiced smile. "No concern, just procedure. If you'll come with me toward the galley." Elena didn't stand. "I'd prefer to stay seated." Unless this concerns safety or the FAA, I believe I'm within my rights to remain here." Heather exhaled, quiet but clipped. "You've been flagged for noncompliance earlier in the flight. I'm simply following protocol." This time, more heads turned. Noncompliance. Grant leaned forward again. "She hasn't done a thing," he muttered. "This is absurd." Elena kept her tone calm. "I requested water. I remained in my assigned seat. And I declined to be interrogated twice about my boarding pass. If you interpret that as noncompliance, then I'd suggest reviewing your training." Heather's eyes darkened. "Miss, if you don't follow instructions, I may have to escalate this to the captain." Elena paused, her gaze never wavering. "Then I'd be happy to speak with the captain." Heather froze. That hadn't been the plan. She had expected submission, not escalation, but before she could respond, a low voice echoed from the intercom. "This is your captain speaking. Apologies for the interruption. Could Flight Attendant Heather Langford please report to the flight deck?" The cabin went quiet. Heather stiffened, gave one last tight glance at Elena, then turned and marched toward the cockpit. Grant leaned into the aisle, his brows raised. "That was fast," he whispered. Rachel approached Elena again, nervous now. "Did you call the captain?" Elena gave a subtle shake of her head. "No." Rachel hesitated. Then Elena's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Sometimes the truth travels faster than gossip." Inside the cockpit, Captain Jonas McAllister turned his chair toward Heather as she entered. He was a tall man in his mid-50s, silver hair peeking beneath his headset, his expression stern but fair. "Heather," he began, his voice calm but pointed. "I've been receiving cabin reports from our mid-flight audit monitor. Someone flagged unusual service patterns and selective attention to one passenger. Want to explain?" Heather blinked, caught off guard. "I was just following protocol, sir. There was confusion over the boarding process. I was attempting to resolve it." "Without cause?" he asked. There were doubts about her ticket, her demeanor. Her demeanor. He cut in. Heather fumbled. She was non-responsive, deliberately evasive. Jonas sighed. "Heather, do you know who Elena Brooks is?" The question landed like a blow. No." Jonas turned his screen. A flight manifest glowed. Next to 2A was a notation in green text. "Owner, Aurora Aviation Holdings, Inc." Heather stared at it, confused. "She's a corporate client. She owns 21% of Aurora Air's holding company," Jonas said quietly. "She was instrumental in our newest sustainability initiative. She's not just a passenger. She's a principal stakeholder." Heather's mouth opened slightly. The blood drained from her face. I didn't know. I didn't recognize her." Jonas didn't respond right away. Then he said simply, "You didn't ask?" Back in the cabin, Elena sat perfectly still, unaware of the exact conversation unfolding. But she could feel the energy shifting. The murmurs had grown quieter. The tension had moved from her to someone else. She opened her phone and tapped a single name, Ava Chen, her head of PR. No message yet, just readiness. Grant shifted in his seat again and turned toward Elena. "Ms. Brooks," he said softly, "may I ask you a question?" She looked over, giving a polite nod. "Of course. Why didn't you just tell her who you were?" Elena smiled gently. "I could have. But then she would have treated me better for the wrong reasons." Grant nodded slowly. He understood. It wasn't about recognition. It was about principle. The right to dignity without needing a resume to earn it. Heather returned 10 minutes later, visibly shaken. Her posture wilted. The shine of superiority had dulled. She approached Elena with a paper-thin smile. "Ms. Brooks, I apologize if there were any misunderstandings earlier." Elena looked up. "Misunderstandings?" Heather cleared her throat. "Regarding your seat and your service." Elena stared at her, not with rage, not with judgment, but with an impossible calm. "The seat was printed on my boarding pass," she said quietly. "The service. I suppose that's where the misunderstanding lies." Heather swallowed. Behind her, Rachel stood a few feet back, observing everything. There was no gloating on her face, only concern. Jonas appeared in the aisle behind them moments later. He spoke firmly. "Ms. Langford, I'd like you to return to the galley for now. We'll have a more thorough conversation once we're on the ground." Heather nodded mutely and walked away. Jonas turned to Elena. "Ms. Brooks, if you need anything at all, please don't hesitate." Elena stood, adjusted her jacket, and extended a hand. "I appreciate your leadership, Captain." He shook her hand respectfully, then returned to the flight deck. Elena sat down again. Rachel approached quietly. "Are you okay?" she asked. Elena looked at her and smiled. "I've been better, but I've also been worse." Rachel nodded, her expression tinged with guilt. "I should have spoken up sooner." Elena reached out and touched her arm gently. "You spoke at the right moment. Courage is not about timing. It's about truth." The cabin settled once more, but no one looked at Elena with doubt anymore. They looked at her with wonder, and just beneath that respect, the cabin was thick with tension as the plane cruised steadily above the clouds. Elena Brooks sat with unwavering calm, her eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the window. But inside her mind, a storm brewed, one she kept carefully locked away. Heather Langford's hands trembled slightly as she moved down the aisle. Every passenger's eyes felt like lasers aimed at her. The cold professionalism she wore as armor was beginning to crack. This was no longer a simple matter of seating or service. This was a battle of wills, and Heather was losing. As she approached Elena's seat again, a flicker of frustration flashed in her eyes. The composure that had so unnerved her earlier now felt like a challenge she couldn't tolerate. Elena looked up, meeting Heather's gaze with quiet strength. There was no anger there, only a depth of resolve that made Heather's blood run cold. "Miss Langford," Elena said softly, "if there is an issue, I would appreciate if it were handled with respect." Heather's lips pressed together tightly. She wanted to lash out, to regain control by force if necessary. It was her only weapon left. Suddenly, Heather's hand shot out, striking Elena sharply across the cheek. The sound echoed through the cabin like a gunshot. Gas exploded from every corner. The elegant first-class passengers froze, some clutching their armrests, others staring wide-eyed in disbelief. Elena's head tilted slightly from the impact. A bright red handprint blossomed on her cheek, but there was no cry, no flinch, no tear. Instead, Elena sat straighter, a calm fire igniting in her eyes. She looked directly at Heather with unwavering command. Heather's face paled. Her arm hung mid-air, trembling as if realizing she had crossed an irreversible line. Grant Pierce was the first to break the stunned silence. His voice rang clear and strong. "That is assault, completely unacceptable." Others began to speak up, their voices mingling with outrage and disbelief. An older woman muttered, "I have flown for decades and never seen anything so disgraceful." Heather took a step back, overwhelmed by the sudden weight of collective judgment. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came. Elena reached into her jacket pocket and gently pulled out a white handkerchief. With deliberate care, she wiped the red mark from her cheek. Her face remained serene, but beneath that surface was a steely resolve none could ignore. Heather's eyes darted nervously around the cabin. The authority she had once wielded with ease was slipping like sand through her fingers. "Miss Langford." Elena's voice was calm, yet heavy with consequence. "Your actions are not only unprofessional, they are criminal." Heather stumbled over her words, trying to justify herself. "I was provoked. She was making trouble. I didn't mean to Grant Pierce cut her off. I saw everything. You were the aggressor from the start." Passengers nodded in agreement. Their collective disappointment was palpable. Heather's facade crumbled. She looked down, the weight of humiliation sinking in. Suddenly, she spoke in a trembling voice. "Please, Miss Brooks, I didn't recognize you. I didn't know. I'm sorry. Please forgive me." Elena remained silent for a moment. Then she stood slowly, every movement measured and commanding. "There is nothing to forgive. There is only accountability." Her words reverberated through the cabin like a verdict. Heather's knees buckled. She collapsed to the floor, overwhelmed by shame and despair. Rachel Nguyen approached cautiously, her eyes full of sympathy and unease. Elena turned and placed a steady hand on Rachel's shoulder. "This is not personal. It is justice." The flight attendant nodded. Captain Jonas McAllister appeared in the aisle, his expression serious and resolute. "Miss Langford, you are relieved of duty for the remainder of this flight." Heather looked up, eyes wild with panic. She tried to protest, but the captain's tone was final. Passengers erupted into whispers of approval. Grant Pierce stood again. "Thank you, Captain." Elena sat back down. The cabin's atmosphere shifted from tense to expectant. The passengers had witnessed more than an assault. They had seen dignity stand unshaken. Elena closed her eyes briefly, letting the moment settle. Inside, she wrestled with the familiar ache of conflict and the quiet hope for change. The cabin's energy had shifted palpably. What had been a tightly wound tension now released into a charged silence, thick with anticipation and judgment. Passengers exchanged glances, some nodding in quiet agreement, others still processing the gravity of what they had witnessed. Elena Brooks remained composed, but inside her heart, a storm of emotions swirled: pain, resolve, and a deep-seated understanding of the journey still ahead. Heather Langford sat isolated near the back of the cabin, escorted by 2 security officers who had just arrived. Her face was ashen, eyes rimmed with tears. Her earlier arrogance now stripped away and replaced with shame and fear. Every step she took was heavy, weighed down by the reality that her actions had consequences far beyond the moment. Elena observed quietly from her seat. She understood that this incident was more than just a personal victory or defeat. It was a microcosm of the systemic issues she had fought against throughout her career. A moment where centuries of bias, prejudice, and discrimination converged in a single, painful flash. As the officers led Heather off the plane upon landing, the murmurs among the passengers swelled into a chorus of affirmation for Elena. Many approached her with gratitude and admiration. Some spoke softly about their own experiences with prejudice. Others simply nodded, their eyes reflecting a newfound respect for the woman who had endured and stood firm. Rachel Nguyen stayed close, offering support and quiet encouragement. She looked at Elena with something like awe. "You handled that with grace. I hope one day I can be that strong," Rachel said quietly. Elena smiled gently. "Strength isn't a destination. It's a daily choice. You're already on that path. Later, as the passengers disembarked, media representatives waiting on the tarmac began asking questions. Whispers of the incident quickly spread, igniting a firestorm of attention. Elena knew that once the story reached the public, it would force deeper conversations about race, power, and dignity in places where such conversations were often avoided. That evening, Elena returned to her hotel room, exhaustion washing over her like a wave. She sank into the chair by the window and stared out at the city lights. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages, support from colleagues, inquiries from journalists, and texts from her daughter, who had watched the story unfold on the news. Elena's thoughts drifted to her daughter, to the world she was inheriting. She wanted to build a future where her child would never have to face the same indignities, where respect was not a privilege for some, but a right for all. The next morning, Elena convened an emergency meeting with her executive team. The incident on the flight was more than a personal ordeal. It was a call to action. "We must be the change," she said firmly. "Aurora Air will lead by example. We will overhaul our training programs, enforce zero tolerance for discrimination, and create a culture of respect and inclusion. This is not negotiable." Her team nodded, inspired by her vision, but aware of the challenges ahead. Implementing systemic change in a large corporation would require commitment, transparency, and unwavering leadership. Meanwhile, Heather Langford faced internal investigations and legal consequences. The airline's board released a statement condemning her behavior and reaffirming their dedication to equity and professionalism. Public opinion was divided. Some sympathized with Heather's stress and workload, while many others condemned her actions as a blatant abuse of power fueled by prejudice. Elena used the moment to speak openly in interviews about the importance of standing against injustice with dignity and resolve. She emphasized that no one should have to prove their worthiness to be treated with basic human respect. As days turned into weeks, Elena and her team rolled out comprehensive diversity and inclusion initiatives. They brought in experts, held workshops, and created safe spaces for employees and passengers to share their experiences and learn from each other. Rachel Nguyen was promoted to a leadership role, becoming a symbol of courage and integrity within the company. She took on the responsibility with humility and fierce determination to make the airline a better place. The media coverage sparked similar conversations across industries. Other airlines began reviewing their policies. Corporations revisited their cultures. Communities engaged in dialogues about race, privilege, and accountability. Elena knew this was only the beginning. The work was long and often exhausting, but she believed in the power of persistent, collective effort. One evening, she sat with her daughter, sharing the story of the flight and the lessons it carried. She spoke of strength, kindness, and the courage to stand up not just for oneself, but for others. Her daughter listened intently, eyes wide with understanding. "You're my hero, Mom," she said softly. Elena smiled, feeling a profound sense of purpose. "I'm just someone who refuses to be silent." And with that, the journey toward change continued one step, one conversation, one act of courage at a time. Days after the turbulent flight, the reverberations of what had happened aboard Aurora Air Flight 606 began to ripple far beyond the confines of the airplane. The story of Elena Brooks, the composed black CEO who had endured a public slap from a flight attendant unaware of her true identity, captured headlines, conversations, and hearts across the nation. At Aurora Aviation's sleek headquarters, the atmosphere was charged with urgency and hope. Elena sat at the head of a long conference table, surrounded by her executive team and department heads. The room hummed with a sense of purpose. She had summoned everyone to outline the next steps in the company's profound journey toward equity and respect. We cannot allow the injustice that happened on Flight 606 to be just an isolated incident, Elena began, her voice calm but resolute. It must become a catalyst for systemic change within Aurora Air and the airline industry at large. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. We owe it not only to our passengers, but to every employee who serves on our flights, every person who walks through our doors, and every community we touch. The time for performative gestures is over. This is about real, lasting transformation. She outlined a comprehensive plan that included mandatory anti-bias training for all employees, revamping the hiring and promotion process to ensure diversity at every level, and implementing a transparent system for reporting discrimination and harassment without fear of retaliation. Rachel Nguyen, now promoted to a key management position, sat attentively near Elena. Her journey from a timid flight attendant to a symbol of integrity inspired many. During the meeting, Rachel spoke candidly about the challenges she faced in confronting Heather's behavior and the support she hoped the new initiatives would provide for others like her. Elena nodded appreciatively. Rachel's courage shows us what's possible when we create a culture of respect and accountability. Outside the walls of the company, the public reaction was both powerful and mixed. Social media buzzed with support for Elena and criticism for Aurora Air's previous lack of oversight. Hashtags like "outrage justice for Elena" and "fly with respect" trended for days. Advocacy groups praised the incident as a turning point for conversations about race and dignity in customer service industries. Yet, as with any significant social reckoning, there were dissenting voices. Some questioned whether the incident had been overblown. Others argued it was a symptom of broader societal tensions that could not be easily resolved. But even the skeptics could not ignore the growing momentum for change. In her private life, Elena grappled with the personal toll of becoming a public figure in such a contentious moment. She received heartfelt messages from people who saw themselves in her story, Black women who had been dismissed, demeaned, or doubted. Their stories fueled her resolve, but also reminded her of the long road ahead. One afternoon, while reviewing emails, Elena paused on a message from her daughter's school. They had invited her to speak at an upcoming event on leadership and overcoming adversity. The invitation felt deeply personal. It was a chance to share not only her professional journey, but also the lessons from Flight 606 with a younger generation. Elena thought of the young faces she would meet, children and teenagers navigating a world that often questioned their worth. She wanted them to know they did not need to prove themselves through others' recognition, but could stand tall through their own strength and dignity. Meanwhile, Heather Langford's story took a different trajectory. After being suspended from Aurora Air, she faced internal investigations and legal scrutiny. Public opinion largely condemned her actions, and the airline made it clear that such behavior would not be tolerated. Heather, once confident and authoritative, now confronted the consequences of her prejudice and poor judgment. Interviews with former colleagues revealed a pattern of intolerance and difficulty adapting to evolving social standards. Her case became a cautionary tale within the airline industry. Other companies began reviewing their own policies and training programs, eager to avoid similar public relations disasters. Elena's leadership style also came under public discussion. She was praised for her composure and dignity in the face of aggression, but also for her strategic acumen in turning a personal affront into a platform for meaningful change. Interviews with major news outlets revealed a woman who was not only a successful business leader, but also a deeply empathetic human being. Her calm voice carried a message that resonated beyond corporate boardrooms, one about justice, respect, and the power of persistence. In the weeks that followed, Aurora Air launched a national campaign promoting respect and inclusion in travel. Advertisements featured real stories from diverse employees and passengers, emphasizing the airline's commitment to creating a welcoming environment for all passengers. Inspired by the story of Flight 606, began sharing their own experiences of kindness and discrimination during travel. Aurora Air encouraged this dialogue through online forums and community events, fostering conversations that were often difficult but necessary. Elena also partnered with civil rights organizations to support broader initiatives aimed at dismantling systemic bias in industries beyond aviation. She believed that her company's role extended into society's larger fabric. Through it all, Elena remained grounded by the quiet moments, the texts from her daughter asking when Mom would come home, the walks she took alone to reflect, and the deep, steady breaths she took to center herself amid the storm of attention. She understood that true change was rarely swift or easy. It required patience, persistence, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. But she also knew that Flight 606 was a turning point, a moment when silence was broken and dignity reclaimed. And that was a victory worth fighting for. The quiet moments that followed the media storm were some of the most challenging for Elena Brooks. Away from the spotlight and away from the echoing applause of supporters, she faced the internal struggles that had long been a part of her journey, but had never fully surfaced. Sitting alone in her apartment late one evening, Elena stared at the city skyline glittering beneath a blanket of stars. The events of the flight, the slap, the aftermath, they replayed endlessly in her mind like a film on loop. She felt a familiar knot tighten in her chest, the weight of expectation, the loneliness of leadership, and the constant battle between strength and vulnerability. Elena knew she was strong. She had to be. Her company, her employees, her family depended on it, yet strength was not absence of doubt. It was the quiet voice inside that told her to keep going, even when fear whispered otherwise. She recalled the countless times she had been underestimated, dismissed because of the color of her skin or the calm way she carried herself. Those experiences had forged a resilience within her, but had also left scars she rarely allowed herself to examine. Tonight, the battle was not about external foes, but the ones within. Was she truly ready for the long fight ahead? Could she withstand the pressure without losing herself? Would the victories come with too great a cost? Her phone chimed softly, breaking the silence. A message from her daughter, Mom. I'm proud of you. I hope you're taking care of yourself. Elena smiled sadly. Taking care of herself often felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through the window, Elena made a decision. She would seek balance. She would face her doubts head-on instead of burying them. During a quiet breakfast, she shared her thoughts with her closest friend and advisor, Maya. I feel torn sometimes, Elena admitted, like I'm carrying the weight of every injustice on my shoulders, and sometimes I wonder if I'm enough. Maya reached across the table and took her hand. You are more than enough, Elena. But you don't have to carry it all alone. That's why you have a team, why you have allies, and why you have people who believe in you. Elena nodded, feeling the truth of those words settle within her. That day, she returned to the office with renewed resolve, but also with a softer edge. She invited her leadership team into an open dialogue about the emotional toll of leading change. They shared their own vulnerabilities and fears, creating a space where strength and empathy coexisted. Rachel Noyan spoke candidly about the challenges she faced after the flight, how she wrestled with guilt for not speaking up sooner and the pressure of stepping into a leadership role. Elena listened, offering encouragement and acknowledging that growth was messy, and often uncomfortable. Meanwhile, Heather Langford's battle was of a different nature. In a sterile office, she sat across from a company investigator. The woman who once commanded first class with certainty now faced questions that cut to her core. Heather struggled to reconcile the professional she believed herself to be with the prejudiced actions she had taken. She wrestled with shame, denial, and the flickers of remorse that surfaced amid her defenses. She knew her career was on the line. But deeper than that was a reckoning with her own biases, those unspoken judgments and fears that had driven her to lash out. Heather's internal battle was as fierce as Elena's, but carried a different weight. The fight to unlearn ingrained prejudices and find a path forward that included accountability and growth. Back at Aurora Air, Elena pushed forward with the company's transformation. She launched wellness initiatives to support employees navigating the emotional challenges of working in high-pressure environments. She personally mentored several young women of color, sharing her story and encouraging them to claim their space in industries where they were often marginalized. In quiet moments, Elena also found solace in small acts of normalcy, a walk in the park, a phone call with her daughter, or simply sipping tea by the window. These moments reminded her that beneath the public figure was a human being with hopes, fears, and the need for rest. The battle within did not end with a single victory. It was ongoing, complex, and deeply personal. But Elena knew that by facing it openly, she could model a new kind of leadership, one that embraced vulnerability as strength and invited others to do the same. Her story was not just about a single flight or a single slap. It was about the quiet courage it took to stand firm, to speak truth, and to lead with both heart and mind. And as she looked toward the future, Elena felt a deep, steady certainty. No matter the challenges ahead, she would continue to fight not just for herself, but for everyone who deserved to be seen, heard, and respected. The following weeks marked a new chapter for Elena Brooks and Aurora Air. With the flight incident fresh in the public eye, Elena's voice became more than just that of a CEO. It became a beacon for change and a call to action. In a packed conference room at a major industry summit, Elena stood before an audience of airline executives, policymakers, and advocates. The weight of expectation pressed lightly on her shoulders, but her posture was poised and confident. She began by recounting the events on Flight 606, not just the confrontation with Heather Langford, but the larger story of systemic bias that too often went unseen. Her voice was calm, but carried the power of lived experience. This was not just an isolated incident, Elena said, her eyes scanning the crowd. It was a reflection of deeper, pervasive problems that demand our attention and our courage to confront. She detailed Aurora Air's commitment to overhauling its culture from mandatory anti-bias training to the establishment of an independent oversight board tasked with ensuring accountability. We must move beyond apologies and empty promises, she continued. We must embed respect and equity into every policy, every interaction, every corner of our industry. Questions came fast and fierce from the audience, some supportive, some skeptical. Elena welcomed the dialogue, knowing that true progress required transparency and willingness to listen. In the days that followed, her message spread rapidly. News outlets featured her interviews, podcasts invited her to speak, and social media amplified her calls for reform. Elena's authenticity resonated. She spoke not as a distant executive, but as someone who had lived the struggle and refused to be silenced. At Aurora Air headquarters, the momentum translated into concrete action. Employee resource groups flourished, providing safe spaces for marginalized voices. Leadership underwent ongoing training to confront unconscious biases. policies were rewritten with input from diverse perspectives. Rachel Nguyen, now a respected leader, became a mentor and advocate within the company. She worked closely with Elena to shape programs that empowered frontline employees and fostered a culture of inclusion. Yet change was not without its challenges. Some resisted, clinging to old ways or dismissing the urgency of the moment. Rumors and resentment simmered beneath the surface. Elena confronted these obstacles with patience and firmness, recognizing that transformation was a marathon, not a sprint. She also embraced opportunities to engage directly with passengers and staff, hosting forums where stories were shared and solutions co-created. One evening, during an informal gathering with employees, Elena listened as a young flight attendant described an incident where a passenger had been treated unfairly because of their background. "I want to make sure no one else feels invisible," the attendant said, her voice shaking slightly. Elena nodded, her heart swelling with both pride and determination. "You are the voice of change," she told her, "and your courage is what will carry us forward." Outside the corporate world, Elena became a sought-after speaker on diversity and leadership. She collaborated with civil rights organizations, advocated for policy reforms, and inspired other industries to examine their own biases. Her story sparked important conversations about dignity and respect, not just in air travel, but in workplaces and communities nationwide. Meanwhile, Heather Langford's journey took a somber turn. She publicly apologized, attended sensitivity training, and began the difficult process of self-reflection. Though many questioned whether her transformation was genuine, Heather faced her consequences with a humility that had been absent before. Elena followed these developments with a measured heart. She believed in accountability, but also in the possibility of redemption. The flight incident had ignited a movement within Aurora Air and beyond, a movement grounded in the belief that respect was not negotiable, and that every person deserved to be treated with fairness and kindness. As Elena prepared for another flight, this time as a respected leader rather than a passenger under scrutiny, she felt a quiet satisfaction. The road ahead would remain difficult. There would be setbacks and battles yet to be fought. But she was no longer alone. She was part of a growing chorus of voices demanding change, and she would keep speaking, leading, and fighting until that change was real. Behind the headlines and public applause, the real work of change often took place in quiet, unseen moments. For Elena Brooks and her team at Aurora Air, the battle was no longer just about policy or public image. It was about the daily reality of transforming minds and hearts. The airline's new diversity and inclusion initiatives had made significant strides, but old habits and subtle biases lingered beneath the surface. Elena knew the fight for true equality was ongoing and deeply complex. One afternoon, Elena met privately with a group of employees who represented a range of backgrounds and roles, from cabin crew to maintenance staff, from marketing to ground operations. The room was small but charged with honesty and emotion. Many shared stories of moments when they felt invisible, unheard, or marginalized in ways that never made the news but still shaped their experience at work. I once overheard a supervisor say, "People like you don't belong in leadership," said Marcus, a young black technician, his voice steady but edged with hurt. Elena listened carefully, her heart heavy yet hopeful. These were the unseen battles, microaggressions, coded language, unintentional exclusions that slowly eroded trust and morale. She responded with a promise. "We will do better," she said firmly. "And not just with new policies, but by creating a culture where every voice matters." Rachel Nguyen shared her own struggles, admitting how even after her promotion, she sometimes felt the weight of others' doubts. "It's exhausting to prove yourself every day," she confessed. "But I want to help change that for the next generation." The group discussed ideas for peer support networks, ongoing training, and transparent feedback systems. Elena encouraged them to lead these efforts and assured them of her unwavering support. Outside the meeting room, Elena faced her own unseen battle. The pressure of leadership and public scrutiny often left her emotionally drained. In moments of solitude, she grappled with the tension between the fierce CEO the world expected and the woman who yearned for simple connection and peace. One evening, after a long day of meetings and media interviews, Elena found herself at a quiet cafe. She watched families laugh and friends share stories. The normalcy felt both comforting and distant. Her phone buzzed with messages from her daughter, reminders to eat, rest, and breathe. She responded with a smiley face, but felt the truth of exhaustion deep in her bones. The battle within balancing strength and vulnerability, public duty and private needs, was perhaps the hardest fight of all. Meanwhile, Heather Langford's journey toward change was slow and uneven. Though she attended mandatory training and expressed remorse, her colleagues remained wary. Some believed true transformation was possible. Others held on to skepticism. Heather faced the reality that rebuilding trust would take more than words. It required consistent action and humility. In a moment of quiet reflection, Heather reached out to Rachel Nguyen, hoping to bridge the gap between past hurt and future healing. Their conversation was tentative but sincere, a step toward understanding. Back at Aurora Air, Elena championed mental health resources and wellness programs, recognizing that change required supporting the whole person. She also encouraged leaders to model empathy and accountability, understanding that culture shifted one interaction at a time. The media attention slowly shifted from scandal to solution, highlighting Aurora Air's commitment to authentic reform. Elena used this momentum to push for industry-wide collaboration. Believing that systemic issues required collective effort, she convened meetings with executives from other airlines and civil rights advocates, fostering conversations that were both challenging and hopeful. Through these efforts, Elena became not just a corporate leader, but a trusted voice in the ongoing dialogue about equity and justice. Yet she never lost sight of the simple truths that grounded her: the power of listening, the courage to speak, the importance of standing firm, even when the battles were unseen and the victories small. The road to meaningful change was rarely linear. For Elena Brooks and Aurora Air, the path was marked by difficult decisions, moments of doubt, and the relentless pressure to balance idealism with practicality. As the airline's transformation efforts continued, Elena found herself at a critical crossroads, one that tested her leadership, her values, and her resolve. One morning, Elena received an urgent call from the board of directors. They were concerned about the financial impact of the ongoing reforms and the negative publicity surrounding the incident on Flight 606. Some members urged her to focus on damage control and return to business as usual. Elena listened carefully, aware of the tension between maintaining profitability and pursuing justice. "We cannot compromise our integrity," she replied firmly. "True success means building a company that stands for respect and equality. If we lose sight of that, we lose everything." Despite her conviction, the pressure weighed heavily on her. She spent sleepless nights considering the implications for her company, her employees, and her own career. In those quiet hours, Elena wrestled with fears she rarely admitted aloud. Would pushing so hard for change alienate key stakeholders? Could she risk the stability of Aurora Air for the sake of principles? Was the fight worth the personal and professional cost? Her trusted advisor, Maya Lewis, offered steady counsel. "Leaders are often tested at crossroads like this," Maya said gently. but your strength lies in your clarity of purpose. Remember why you started this journey? Elena took those words to heart. She renewed her commitment to lead with authenticity, even when the stakes felt impossibly high. Meanwhile, Heather Langford faced her own crossroads. After months of training and reflection, she was offered a chance to return to Aurora Air in a limited capacity under strict supervision and with a mandate to participate in ongoing diversity initiatives. Heather grappled with the choice. Returning meant confronting not only her past, but the skepticism of colleagues and passengers alike. Walking away meant leaving behind a career she had built, albeit tarnished. One afternoon, Heather sat with Rachel Nguyen in a quiet conference room. The air between them was tentative, but charged with the possibility of healing. "I want to make this right," Heather said earnestly. "But I know I have a lot to prove." Rachel nodded slowly. "Change is a process. It takes time and action. If you're truly committed, I'm willing to support you, but you have to show it every day." Their conversation marked a turning point, not a resolution, but a fragile beginning. Back at Aurora Air, Elena continued to push for systemic reform. She launched new programs focused on leadership development, mental health support, and community engagement. She also worked closely with Rachel and other leaders to create mentorship opportunities for underrepresented employees, believing that empowering others was essential to sustaining change. Despite setbacks and resistance, Elena remained focused on the long-term vision, a company where dignity and respect were foundational, not optional. Publicly, she spoke candidly about the challenges of leading transformation. "It is not easy to confront entrenched biases or to face criticism from all sides," she said during a televised interview, "but it is necessary. We must be willing to stand in discomfort if we want to grow." Her message resonated widely, inspiring many beyond the airline industry. At home, Elena found strength in the simple moments, the laughter of her daughter, the support of close friends, the quiet satisfaction of knowing she was living her truth. The crossroads she faced were complex and often painful, but with each choice, she reaffirmed her commitment to justice, compassion, and leadership that mattered. As Aurora Air moved forward, the company and its people embodied the difficult, ongoing journey from crisis to change, from conflict to community. And Elena knew that while the path was uncertain, the choice to keep walking it with courage was what truly defined her. The morning sun filtered softly through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Aurora Air's headquarters, casting a warm glow over the bustling office below. Elena Brooks stood by the window, her gaze resting on the city skyline. After months of upheaval, challenges, and tireless effort, a new chapter was beginning not just for the airline, but for herself and all those who had fought alongside her. The transformation that had once seemed daunting was becoming tangible. Employee engagement was rising, customer feedback was more positive, and the atmosphere in the company felt lighter, more inclusive. Elena's thoughts drifted back to Flight 606, the incident that had ignited this journey. What had once been a source of pain and conflict was now a catalyst for change, a powerful reminder of why she had to keep pushing forward. Today, she was preparing to lead the company's first annual Diversity and Inclusion Summit, a gathering of employees, executives, community leaders, and advocates. The event was designed to celebrate progress, confront ongoing challenges, and chart the course for the future. As the summit began, Elena took the stage with calm confidence. Her voice carried the quiet strength that had become her signature. "We stand at the dawn of a new era," she said, "one where respect, equity, and inclusion are not just goals, but lived realities. This journey is far from over, But the steps we've taken together prove that change is possible. She spoke of the many individuals whose courage had made the difference, from Rachel Nguyen, whose leadership had inspired countless colleagues, to the frontline employees who bravely shared their stories. The room responded with applause and nods of agreement. The sense of community was palpable. Later, during a panel discussion, Rachel shared her personal journey, the doubts, the triumphs, and the ongoing work. It's about creating a space where everyone feels seen and valued, Rachel said, where we don't just talk about change, but live it every day. Elena felt a surge of pride. Rachel's voice was becoming a powerful force within Aurora Air, a symbol of hope and progress. Outside the formal events, Elena also made time for quieter moments, listening to employees, engaging with customers, and mentoring young professionals. She knew that true change was built on relationships and trust, not just policies. One afternoon, Elena met with a group of young interns from diverse backgrounds. Their enthusiasm and fresh perspectives energized her. "Change starts with us," she told them. "You are the leaders of tomorrow. Never underestimate your power to shape a better world." As the summit concluded, Elena stepped outside into the cool evening air. The city lights twinkled, reflecting the promise of new beginnings. Her phone buzzed with a message from her daughter. "Proud of you, Mom. Keep shining." Elena smiled, feeling the deep connection that sustained her. The road ahead would still hold challenges, setbacks, and difficult conversations. But she was ready to face the future with courage, compassion, and unwavering commitment. A new dawn had broken, and with it, the hope of a brighter, more just tomorrow. The sun was setting behind the mountains as Elena Brooks stepped out of the Aurora Air headquarters for the last time that evening. The long journey from the tense moments on Flight 606 to the profound changes sweeping through the company and beyond had shaped not only her career, but her very soul. Elena paused on the steps, taking a deep breath. The cool evening air filled her lungs as she reflected on the legacy she was building, not just as a CEO, but as a woman who refused to accept injustice quietly. Throughout her life, Elena had learned that strength was not measured by moments of triumph alone, but by the courage to face adversity with dignity and the grace to lift others as she rose. Her story had become a beacon for many, from the frontline workers who found their voices, to the young leaders like Rachel Nguyen who embodied hope and resilience, to the communities demanding change. Elena's journey was intertwined with theirs. That evening, at a small gathering with close colleagues, Elena shared her thoughts. "This is bigger than any one person," she said softly. "It's about creating a future where respect is the foundation of every interaction, where no one is judged by appearance or circumstance, but embraced for their humanity." Rachel smiled, her eyes shining with admiration. "You taught us that strength is quiet, persistent, and grounded in compassion," she said. "That's the legacy we want to carry forward." Elena looked around the room, feeling a deep sense of peace. The battles had been hard-fought, but the victories, both big and small, were real. The company had transformed. Yes, but so had she. The internal conflicts, the doubts, the moments of vulnerability had forged a leader who was not only powerful, but deeply human. As the night grew darker, Elena stepped outside to gaze at the stars. The vast sky reminded her of the endless possibilities ahead. Her daughter joined her, slipping an arm through hers. "Mom, I'm proud of you," her daughter said softly. "You've shown me what it means to stand tall, even when the world pushes back." Elena smiled, feeling a warmth that transcended the challenges. "I'm proud of you, too," she replied. "You are the future I fight for. Together, they stood beneath the sky, connected by love and hope. Elena knew the journey toward justice and dignity was far from over. There would always be new challenges, new battles to face, but she was ready to lead with courage and kindness, ready to inspire others to stand firm, and ready to leave a legacy of strength, one built on respect, empathy, and the unwavering belief that every person deserves to be seen and heard. The flight from crisis to change had been long and arduous, but Elena's story was proof that even in the face of injustice, a single voice, steady and true, could ignite a movement and light the way toward a better tomorrow. Elena Brooks' story is more than a confrontation on a plane. It is a powerful reminder that discrimination and prejudice are battles fought every day, often silently, often unseen. Yet, it is also a testament to the strength found in dignity, calm courage, and the refusal to accept injustice. Her journey shows us that one person's resolve can spark change not only in a company, but across society. As we reflect on the pain caused by intolerance and the courage it takes to confront it, let us also remember our shared responsibility. Every act of kindness, every voice raised against inequality, adds to a movement toward respect and fairness for all. Thank you for joining us in this emotional journey. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories that matter, stories that inspire, challenge, and uplift. Stay tuned for our next video, where we continue exploring the human spirit's power to overcome adversity and create a better world.